What you are about to hear is a cringy mess. One of my earliest videos featuring my very own scary experiences. They're not much, but they sure creeped me out. I'll be back tomorrow with some high school horror stories. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't. Click that like button to support me, and make sure your notifications are on. Thank you. I hope you enjoy my true horror stories. And just remember, this was over 2 years ago, so you'll see a major difference in my recording style and quality. So try not to cringe too hard, my friends.
Well, you asked for it, people. We've reached 1,000 subscribers, and it's about time I told you my own scary stories. I was planning on making this video a little bit more special by filming myself telling them on the webcam, but a very stubborn zit has thrown that right out the window. Since I won't be doing that, how about you ask me anything in the comments? Anything at all, and I'm talking to you, you perverts and stalkers out there. And don't forget, if you have any creepy or paranormal stories of your own, we would love to publish them to our website's front page or even narrate them in a future video. Just send them to us at masterofhorror.org/submit. Alright then, let's get on with it. I'm not entirely sure how creepy my own experiences are compared to what we usually do, but they definitely creep me the hell out. Number 1. Night Ride Nap. A few years back, I worked with my parents at a local automotive shop where we cleaned cars and did body work. Often it had us working late into the night to get cars out so that we could get paid for them appropriately. For example, one of our clients paid out only every other Friday, so if we missed a certain Friday, we would be out for some cash for about 2 weeks. Anyway, it was around tax season and everybody from soccer moms to big dealerships wanted their vehicles cleaned. It was a Friday night, and we had 2 trucks from a Chevrolet dealership to clean and deliver before 12 midnight. They had set up a late delivery since they knew how busy we were. We got them done rather quickly as all of us were growing tired and wanted to go home. My mom hopped in one truck, my cousin hopped in another, and I drove my car behind them to bring them back after the delivery. By the time we got to the dealership, it was around 11 at night. The streets were as devoid of traffic as they were of light. I need to first mention that the area we worked at was a very small town. There was a Chevy dealership there, but surrounding it were trees. Across the woods and about a 2-mile drive away was a gas station and a small, locally owned supermarket, so it was always quiet, in a very desolate place. We were lucky to keep as busy as we were. Anyway, we made it to the dealership. My cousin and mom parked their trucks and walked inside the still-lit office to deliver the invoices. Inside, I could barely make out what looked like a suited man who was probably as tired as we were. I was a ways away in the parking lot, watching and waiting for them to come out so we could pack up and finally go home for the night. A few minutes passed, and I realized they were going to take much longer than I expected. Eventually, I gave in and reclined in the driver's seat, closing my eyes for a much-needed rest. There wasn't a single streetlight nearby, so it was dark. I fell asleep quickly and easily. And then I woke up to a very unnerving sound. It was the sound of the back left car door opening. The door that was right behind me. Half asleep, I just assumed my mom and cousin had finally come back from their business in the office, until I looked up and saw them still in that office, talking to the man in the suit. Immediately, covered in goose flesh, I jumped and turned toward the back seat just in time to see the door fly open and the silhouette of a man running out and into the trees across the parking lot. In seconds, I was out of that car, locking the doors and heading toward the office with everyone else. The 3 looked at me odd, but I couldn't say anything. I was scared out of my mind. I had no idea what the hell had just happened to me. I sat in a chair in the office, waiting for them to finish up their business. Eventually, they were done, and we walked outside together. "What's wrong, Brendan?" my mom asked me. Up to this point, I still hadn't said anything to them. "You walked in there like you were about to throw up or something." "Someone opened the car door," I could barely reply. "What do you mean?" she wondered. While I was waiting for you guys, someone opened the door behind me, got inside my car, and ran away by the time I turned around. They both looked at me in bewilderment. Luckily, it had rained the previous day and the ground was still muddy, so I decided to see for myself and to show them what I was talking about. I unlocked the car doors, opened the back door, and looked in the floorboard. In the floor was a single muddy stain of what looked like a man's boot. I didn't own anything with that sort of pattern, and I kept my car clean. In fact, I hadn't even had a passenger in my back seat there for weeks. I was usually the only person riding around in that damn car. I'm not sure if they will ever believe what happened to me, but that experience will always haunt me. And that's not the worst part. Not a week later after that, a man was stopped at a stop sign right across the road from where I had been napping that night. Someone jumped into the back seat behind him and stabbed him in the throat 6 times, took his phone and his wallet, and ran off into those same woods. And the freaky part? We had to clean that car for the rental place that owned it. Number 2. Halloween Ghost Hunt. My cousin Shandy, the same girl from the previous story, has always been a fan of the paranormal. About 2 Halloweens back, she decided to have her mom babysit her kids, while me, her, and our significant others were to go out to all the creepiest places that night to film audio and video. We didn't expect to see anything, but we certainly wanted to feel the rush and the fun of it all. As the trick-or-treaters started turning out, we headed out in her silver Jeep and went first to my old church, 43 Assembly of God. It wasn't abandoned or anything like that, but it was a backwoods chapel with one eerily dim street lamp. On its right side was a long, thin road that led to a large lake and an old game trail. We parked in its makeshift parking lot and walked around the building. I told them a story my friend told me when I had gone to that church. A long time ago, when the preacher first started there, he decided to cleanse the place inside out. With some holy water and a cross around his neck, he walked around the outside of the building first, praying and blessing it as he went along. When he reached the back where the woods were only a few feet away, he saw something that sent chills down his spine. In the middle of the day stood a man black as night before him. The man was solid shadow with what looked like an old top hat on his head. There were no details to the figure, just a solid void of blackness. The preacher held up his cross, shaking violently. Eventually, the figure turned toward the woods and disappeared amongst the trees. The pastor was so overcome with fear that he had tears coming from his eyes. He walked faster back toward the front of the building, praying harder now. Eventually, he reached the double doors of the entrance and walked inside, finishing up the blessing. But the moment those doors shut behind him, he heard a slow, deliberate scratch coming from just outside. Then another, and another. He was so spooked, he didn't leave the sanctuary or stop praying until someone else showed up to calm him. That story freaked out our little ghost hunting group and made the night all the more interesting. Sadly, we didn't see or hear anything spooky, even after we walked up and down the mile-long trail down to the lake. Then, my cousin had a better idea for a paranormal hotspot. The 4 of us hopped back in her Jeep and took an ancient back road so deep into the country that there was a single gas station that sold bait and decades-old VHS movies. In fact, the gas station was the only man-made place for miles around, except for the graveyard, which happened to be our new destination. 5 minutes before we stopped in front of its gated entrance, Shandy's boyfriend grew anxious. He kept talking about feeling not right about this place, like something was wrong there. We laughed at him, but I couldn't help but feel the same about it. Hell, the guy was a soldier, and I knew for a fact that he had been in multiple firefights overseas. It was odd, seeing him so scared of what seemed to be nothing. She put the Jeep in park, locked the doors, and turned off the headlights. True darkness surrounded us. It was a wonder we could even see the lopsided headstones just beyond the gate of the cemetery. Shandy turned toward the 3 of us with a solemn expression and proceeded to tell us a story of her own. She had dated a longtime friend of the family about a year prior to that night. His name was Jesse. Lately, he had been dabbling into some bad things, like drugs of various sorts. One day, a dope friend of his invited him out into this very cemetery to shoot up, and that's exactly what they did. While his friend laughed hysterically in his high, Jesse got up and wandered around the cemetery. The headstones became few, and soon he was overtaken by the forest. He walked slowly in a hazy state until a figure just ahead forced him to a halt. Standing next to a tree ahead of him was an inhuman figure that was about 5 feet tall. It had horns and a demonic tail. Its legs ended in cloven hooves. Jesse was terrified. Suddenly, in silence, the figure pointed one sharp finger toward him and smiled a toothy grin. That's when Jesse bolted, running back the way he came until he could hear his druggy friend's laughter once more. But he took off and never saw that friend again. Nothing happened to the guy, I think. Jesse just didn't want to have anything to do with him. Shandy continued with her story, but I could tell she was beginning to feel extremely uncomfortable. She said from that day on, Jesse saw that demon everywhere he went. Sober or not, that demon in the same shape and form was there only a few feet away, pointing and smiling still. One night, they went out to a bar, but neither of them drank. They sat at a table in the crowded bar and simply talked. Shandy said Jesse had long given up those drugs by that night, and he had not touched a drop of alcohol either. He was clean in his act and appearance. This was the night she first learned of Jesse's enduring problem. He pointed behind her at a corner of the bar. "Do you see that?" She turned to where his finger pointed. "See what? The couple kissing?" No, he replied. "Do you see that thing over there, that thing standing next to them?" Shandy grew nervous, but continued to look. "There's no one else over there, Jesse. What are you talking about?" "It's here," he said. His smile turned into a frown. She could see tears well up in his eyes. "It's always here. It's always pointing. It's always smiling. No matter what I do, it's there." Shandy was beginning to feel afraid. She pulled him up to dance with her to try to lighten the mood, and for a moment he smiled again, but Jesse kept glancing at that corner of the bar. A while later, they were leaving, still very much sober. Jesse drove Shandy home, but before she got out and said goodbye, he spoke up. I was only kidding. There's nothing really there. I was just joking, you know?" She could tell he was lying. That fake grin on his face gave everything away. She replied with a fake smile of her own and began walking to her door. Before she went inside, she looked back at Jesse. He was staring into the rearview mirror. We were all so creeped out by the story that we decided to call it a night and not explore the same cemetery of the thing that had haunted Jesse. The next day, I was awakened by a frantic phone call from Shandy and her boyfriend. "You have to come over right away. You have to see this." Excited, my girlfriend and I hopped in the car and drove over to her house. She was waiting out by her Jeep, arms crossed, with a look that seemed both overjoyed and terrified. "Look at the Jeep," she said, pointing toward the paint. I didn't have to look twice. It was so apparent and obvious that it took my breath away without a moment's notice. All over the Jeep were literally dozens of handprints, if that's what you'd even call them. They weren't normal handprints exactly, because each finger was several inches in length and ended in a sharp point. I asked her if the kids had done it somehow, and she said no, they were still in bed. We both tried to recall last night, but we remembered clearly that not one of us had so much as leaned against her Jeep. I don't know who or what made those handprints, but I do know that what Jesse saw must have been real. I believe he wasn't hallucinating. I believe the drugs he took simply turned him into a different frequency, a frequency in which he could see things, and those things could see him. Number 3. Behind the tree. Not too long ago, I lived in the middle of the woods on top of a hill. To get to my house, you had to drive up a long, winding dirt road, pass a couple of chicken houses, get out of your car to open a gate, drive through, then shut the gate, and drive up more dirt road with woods on all sides. It was worth it for the peace and beauty of the place, or so I thought. You see, as I was driving home one night after getting off work, I was dreading getting out of my car to open the gate. Everybody hated opening that gate. The only reason it was there was so that the local farmers' cows didn't get through and get lost in the woods just beyond it. So, tired and dirty, I got out of my car at about 10:30 at night and opened the gate. Then I got back in my car and drove through. I put the car in park to go and close the gate behind me, but I noticed something strange up ahead. Something was catching the light from my headlights. I squinted my eyes and I nearly died when I saw it. Crouching low to the ground and peeking out from behind a tree was a pale, bony, thin figure. 2 eyes reflected green from my car's lights. It stood painfully still, staring at me. It was so still that I wasn't entirely sure that it was actually a living thing. I was paralyzed in fear, just waiting and hoping that my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was then the inhuman creature pulled itself back behind the tree. I shoved the car into drive and floored it up the hill. I was so painstakingly afraid as I drove up, especially because the tree, with that thing behind it, was only a few feet from my passenger door as I passed it. I didn't care about the farmer's cows escaping with the gate open. Whatever that thing was, it looked like it had come from my nightmares, and I wasn't about to get out of my car with that thing in the woods. To this day, I don't know what it was. It peered at me from behind the trunk of a thin tree, and when it pulled away, its movements were sickeningly unreal, like a marionette on strings. It happened so fast I didn't get many details save for the shape and color, but I do know it wasn't normal. It wasn't right. It wasn't any animal that roamed these lands that I had seen before. Thank God I don't live there anymore, and thank God I don't have to open that gate either. Well, I'm sure you'll appreciate this longer video. I swear to you, these stories are true, but you'll simply have to take my word for them. Oddly though, with all the creepy stuff I've experienced, there are moments where I crave more. Perhaps that's why I enjoy creating these videos so much. Don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and thanks even more for all the subscribers.